All right, Sholem Aleichem Ale, Wir seinen do. We are here for the 5 o'clock program. I'm so excited for what you are about to see because the gentleman who will be presenting is a very dear friend and a very beloved associate. But before we get to them, you saw some of our sponsors. We're very proud to have new sponsors that didn't even make it into the video yet. So I just want to acknowledge for just a moment the Mark A. Levin Philanthropic Fund, John and Amy Israel Pregelman, and our newest sponsor, Dr. Bruce and Leslie Zaffron. So those of you who have been with us for the last 2 days and now today, we have had some wonderful programs. Thousands of people have been enjoying them, and we couldn't be more excited. Now, tonight at 8 o'clock, you will come back, I hope, and watch an amazing concert with Aaron Kula and the Klezmer Company Jazz Orchestra. 10 musicians, 4 talented performers. We have Oscar Cheda. We have Laura Turnbull, and we have Lindsay Forgy, and myself. And so it's called From Borscht to Broadway and the Legacy of 2nd Avenue. I hope you'll come back at 8 o'clock to enjoy our wonderful concert. And then tomorrow, the last day of our Why I Love Yiddish Fest 2021 Purim edition, we are going to have at 12 o'clock live from the Levis JCC in Boca Raton. We're going to do something we call Chaplap, children's stories, Kindermeises. My mother, Professor Miriam Hoffman, translated Dr. Seuss and Rudyard Kipling into Yiddish. And then she translated a beautiful story called Die Wollene Jiden by Schicke Dries. And she called it The Little Ball Made Out of Wool. And I will be doing a Yiddish beautiful children's story in English translated from the Yiddish. So we have Yiddish Dr. Seuss, we have English Schicke Dries. That's at 12 o'clock tomorrow. And then we close our festival at 2 o'clock tomorrow with the great Megillah cycle that Shane Baker and the Congress for Jewish Culture produced last week. They've had thousands of views. It's directed, narrated, and starring Mike Burstyn, who is a legend and my idol, who was in the original Megillah leader. And this is the Megillah cycle by Itzik Manger, which is basically the Megillah leader, but not the version that was on Broadway, the actual Megillah cycle of Itzik Manger, read by some of the most talented people around the world, from Israel, from Europe, from Canada, from New York, from here and there and everywhere. Some of the greatest Yiddish talent in Yiddish with English subtitles. So that's the Megillah cycle tomorrow at 2. And then we finish our festival, but then we keep going. On Monday, we're starting a new play reading series. A Why I Love New Plays and a reading series. And the first one on Monday is going to be 2 plays, one called A Mensch for Mom and Leaving Evelyn. And so there are going to be 2 short plays together, read by professional actors, and that is to find new works that maybe we can produce someday in the future when COVID is finally gone into history. Pui, soll dahar get werden. And then on Tuesday, we're starting a weekly series. Every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, we are going to have my schmoozing with Avi. And every week, we're going to have a different person from around the world, people who do important things in the Jewish cultural world. We're going to rebroadcast our boogie woogie mystic, Philip Namenworth, from this festival. But every week, as a matter of fact, the second one in March. The second Tuesday, we have Neil Hoffman, no relation, who created Mensch on a bench. And then the third week, we're going to do something with the American Guild of Judaic Art, introducing new and classic Jewish artists. And every week will be something else. So please keep coming back to watch our programs. I would like to introduce our next guest. The program, of course, is called Boxing, Wrestling, and Tilting at Windmills, the cartoons of Sholem Asch in the Yiddish press. And the gentleman who is doing it is actually the great grandson of Sholem Asch. And he wanted me to tell you about a wonderful program that you can find on YouTube called Asch Wednesday 2021. I was very honored to be a small part of it, reading a letter from Itzik Manger to the great Sholem Asch, both of whom are my idols, one from my childhood, one from my adulthood. Those of you who may not know, Sholem Asch was one of the greatest Yiddish and Jewish writers of all time, but I will let David Mazower tell you more about that. David, would you care to join me, please? There he is. Shalom Aleichem, mein teure Chaver. How are you?
Great to be with you. Great to be with the festival. I wish I was at the Betsy Hotel.
Yes. Yes, here I am live at the beautiful Betsy Hotel South Beach in the gallery surrounded by the art of Alessandro Sarno. And so it's wonderful to be here, our biggest sponsor, the Betsy Hotel.
It's such a great place.
Where are you right now?
I am sitting in my office at the Yiddish Book Center in Western Massachusetts.
Wonderful. And I'm sure the weather is warm and beautiful.
It's warming.
Good. I'm happy to hear it. Good. Well, I hope you stay safe. I hope you stay healthy. I will see you after your wonderful lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, you're in good hands with the great David Mazower. Thank you. Enjoy.
Avi, thank you so much. Thank you also for being part of the recent Ash Wednesday extravaganza, which was a huge amount of fun with a serious purpose, but also a lot of fun. And it's great to be back with Why I Love Yiddish Fest. So what I'm going to present today is really a slightly different take on my great-grandfather. And it's something that I've been slowly gathering interest in, I guess, for about 15 years. In fact, I just found today a cartoon from, I think, 1909 that's entitled A Gast auf a Weile, Seht auf a Mile. So a guest for a while sees for a mile. And that came from Yivo in 2006. That was the first cartoon of Sholem Asch I think I became aware of. And it sort of opened my eyes to the idea that Asch, as a titanic celebrity, really a towering figure in the Yiddish world from around the turn of the century, 1900, for the next 6 decades, really. He was such a celebrity that his every coming and going, his every controversial speech, his play hits in New York or Warsaw, all of this was covered in the press, and not only covered in reporting form, but often in the form of cartoons, caricatures, drawings, and so on. And it gives really a window into the nature of Yiddish celebrity. And I think it's probably fair to say that nobody was these more cartoons than Sholem Asch, because he really kind of bestrode the Yiddish world and was somebody who readers of the Yiddish press were hugely interested in. So I'll just give a bit of a window into the nature of his celebrity and share some of these really wonderful cartoons with you over the next half hour or so. All right, so let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. I guess if
Yep.
You can see that okay? Cool.
Yes, we're good.
Great. All right. So as you can see, this is a presentation I actually put together just a few weeks ago. Let's see if we can advance. Letting me advance the Resume share. Okay. All right, PowerPoint can be temperamental, Zoom can be temperamental. So what I'll start with is just a bit of an overview of Asch's biography, expressed through some drawings and photographs, just to sort of set the scene for some of the cartoons. So my great-grandfather was born in Kutner, a shtetl in Poland in 1880. He was destined for a scholarly life. Really, his father hoped that of all his 17 children, his Sholem would be the one who would become the scholar, the rabbi, perhaps. But that was a destiny he rejected in his mid-teens and left home and became a letter writer and eventually a young aspiring writer in Warsaw around the turn of the century in the circle around the great Peretz, the great Yiddish writer Peretz. And from then on, he has this extraordinary, really meteoric rise over the next few years, from about 1900 to 1905, 6. And by 1906, which is when this photograph on the right of the screen is taken in London, he is really a young celebrity. And he's in London in 1906 to try and sell his new play, The God of Vengeance, to Jacob P. Adler, who's come from New York to meet him. And Adler doesn't buy the play. That's a whole other story. And by 1908, which is when the cartoon next to it appears in the St. Petersburg Yiddish paper, Der Freund, the Friend. Again, he's known in Russia, in Poland, in America by this time for his stories and his early plays. And the Freund is the first and hugely successful daily newspaper in Yiddish. It starts up in 1903, and all the major Yiddish writers, Peretz and Asch and Raisin and David Frischman and all this kind of Warsaw and Odessa groups are reflected in its pages, serializing stories and novels and so on. So fast forward a couple of decades or so, Asch and his family moved to Paris in 1912, then to America in 1914. That's his first American period, lasts for about 10 years. And the photograph is roughly mid-20s, the mid-1920s. It's a commercial postcard. So there were many commercial postcards of my great-grandfather, but also of other Yiddish writers, sometimes singly, sometimes in groups. People, this was a new thing. Obviously, the sort of heyday of commercial postcards were the 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, and this coincides with the rise of Yiddish celebrity very neatly. And around the same period is the drawing. You can see the mustache and his sort of heavy-set eyes. A wonderful drawing, I think, by Menachem Birnbaum. If some of you know the history of the Czernowitz conference, this 1908 Yiddish conference that discussed the status of the Yiddish language, that was organized by Birnbaum's father, Nathan Birnbaum, or Birnbaum. And he had 3 extraordinarily talented sons. One became a linguist, and 2 became artists, Uriel and this guy, Menachem. And their milieu is Vienna and Berlin, German art of the early 20th century. They're multi-talented in commercial art, in fine art, in book illustration and book design and portraiture. So this is mid-20s. And then Asch is continually drawn, painted, sculpted, often by his friends, his close friends. So the cartoon here is from the mid-30s by a young artist from Lemberg, Lviv. And the sculpture is by Jacob Epstein from the mid-50s. So by this time, Asch has moved back to Europe in the mid-20s. He lived in France until the outbreak of the war, came back to America, was in America from 1939 through till the early 50s, partly in Miami Beach, close to where you are, Avi, in the early 50s, and then finally rejecting America, he moved first to London to live with my grandmother, and then built a small house in Bat Yam, south of Tel Aviv, which is now a really beautiful museum. As and when we're all able to travel, and if you're in Israel, look up the Sholem Asch House Museum. It's full of beautiful paintings, his library, and they've done a really lovely job recently of renovating it. Okay, so that's just to sort of frame his life for some of the cartoons we're going to see. And before I get onto them, I'll just introduce the idea of the rise of the Yiddish press, because this is where the cartoons, just as the stories and novels, appear for a mass public. So most people are not buying Yiddish books as books, they're consuming them in their newspaper, in their periodical, journal. Only the more wealthy can afford to buy books. Why the print runs of Yiddish books are remarkably small. They're often in the hundreds, rarely more than 1,000, but the circulation of the papers is in the tens, even hundreds of thousands. And the newspapers are shared around, they're read in families, in cafes, in libraries, and that is where people really consume Yiddish literature. And the growth of the Yiddish press is a transatlantic phenomenon. It really happens pretty much simultaneously in America and in Europe, and especially in New York and especially in Warsaw. So here you have the satirical paper, Der große Kundus, the big stick, which is actually a kind of international editorial collaborative effort. One of the founders is a humorist called Der Tunkeler, Josef Tunkel, whose career sort of flits between New York and Poland. And on the other side, you can see the Heint, one of the two big heavy-hitting Warsaw Yiddish dailies that get going around 1910 and become very quickly extremely popular. Their circulation is up towards 100,000 pretty quickly. The Große Kundus is a lesser circulation, but it was very, very popular because it's a wildly kind of barbed satirical journal that pulls in a lot of the best comic writers and artists, and it's packed with cartoons. Each issue is maybe 30 pages or so, and they have front page cartoons, often featuring world politics, and studded with cartoons inside. Okay, so moving on to the cartoons, I'll set the scene for the first one with a few of the personalities you'll see in the graphic. So here we have, in the middle, Hillel Zeitlin, with this extraordinarily long beard he always sported. Zeitlin ran a salon in Warsaw in the 1900s, and around that time, had two sons who both became very prominent, noted Yiddish writers. And his rival salon, and somewhat better known, was a salon of Peretz, the guy with the bushy mustache and this sort of very firm gaze that Peretz often has in photographs. And Peretz's home in the center of Warsaw was where my great-grandfather knocked on the door around the late months of 1899 and became adopted and part of this circle of young writers who would turn up once a week in Peretz's home. They would sing Hasidic songs. That was something Peretz was very fond of. They would read their work, gossip about literary politics. And it was a very practical place as well, because Peretz had sort of entrees to newspapers and magazines, and he would, if he liked a writer's work, he would ensure that some of his friends were made aware of them and their stories, and that's what happened with my great-grandfather. And then on the right is Herr David Nomberg, this sort of rather kind of pale, wan, dreamy look in his eyes. Nomberg was, I think, slightly older than my great-grandfather, but they were sort of young, aspiring writers together in the early 1900s, extremely poor. They would sit in cafes for hours at a time and until they made their sort of breakthrough. And then Nomberg also becomes very well known. So that leads to this rather wonderful cartoon that appears, I think, around 1908 in Warsaw from the satirical press or publishing house. And the title, Mashiach ist schon gekommen, the Messiah is here, the Messiah is among us. And what is happening in this cartoon? It's quoting from Isaiah, quotes about, the wolf shall lie down with the lamb, and that's what's happening on the left of the cartoon. I'm just going to find the quote here. Yeah, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. And the little child leading them is Nomberg, who was always this, he wasn't a controversialist, he was very, very well liked. The big beast is Peretz, the lion. And then you have a variety of other, second from left is Zeitlin, who we saw earlier in the center of that previous image with the beard. And on the right of the picture is my great-grandfather, Sholem Asch, with this sort of mop of curly hair. And he has his arms around a guy called David Frischman, who has this sort of snake's tail snaking out from behind him. And why are they in that guise? Because this is just after Asch's sensational play, The God of Vengeance, premiered in 1907, first in Berlin, then in St. Petersburg, and eventually late in 1907 in New York. And it's an immediate sensation. This play is set in a brothel in Poland, featuring 3 prostitutes in the brothel downstairs and this sort of pure virginal teenage daughter who the parents are desperate to marry off and sort of achieve respectability in that way. And if you've seen Indecent, based on a lot of the events surrounding God of Vengeance, Paula Vogel's play, you'll know some of the action. Anyway, it was hugely controversial, and the subject of a hilarious satirical parody by David Frischman, the guy that Asch has his arms around. Frischman, an older, better known Hebrew and Yiddish writer, penned this parody called God of Mercy, which features a pair of young male yeshiva bocher lovers rather than the lesbian lovers of God of Vengeance. It's very funny. It's a sort of one-act skit. It was, if you want to see some extracts of it, look up Ash Wednesday on YouTube, because we world premiered it a few weeks ago. It's hilarious. So, all these sort of topical rivalries and competitive parodies and so on were the subject of cartoons, and people would have immediately understood what was going on here and a lot of the interactions that it satirized. So these cartoons are very cute, very, very brilliant in my view. I mean, they are beautifully drawn, they are topical, they draw on, in this case, biblical quotes, all the Hebrew quotes are drawn from that Isaiah few verses, and they reflect and sum up, the rivalrous literary politics of the emerging modern Yiddish world in Warsaw really beautifully. It's all there in this drawing. Okay. A lot of these come from this sort of period, these early years. This is a cartoon from the Große Kundus, the big stick that we saw the front page of earlier. So much going on in this cartoon. It's really hard to sum it all up, but basically you have Sholem Asch in the middle, hanging from a pen that is carried on the shoulders of Abe Kahn, the editor of the Forwards, the guy on the right, and on the other side is Dr. Chaim Żytlowski, editor of a rival sort of highbrow literary political magazine called Naya Leben, New Life. And they are rivals, Asch and Żytlowski, and there's a lot of back and forth between them, backbiting, gossip. Żytlowski thought that Kahn had dumbed down the Forwards in this really unforgivable way. Kahn accused Żytlowski constantly of being this highbrow elitist who couldn't reach the masses, and yet here they are, forced to carry Asch, who has been, it's not quite clear, has he been kidnapped? It's not totally clear what's going on, but basically they're both complaining about the fact they have to carry this heavy burden. Asch says, ich bin ein Literat, I'm a literary person. Zugebunden zu der Feder, I'm bound to my pen. Ich will nicht wissen von eurer Politikers. I don't want anything to do with your politics. So, you know, it's really kind of delightful. And on the side, I don't know if you can see.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see there are the three prostitutes from God of Vengeance on the side, as Rosa, the cartoonist, calls them the borderkers, the borders, but it's also could be construed as some sort of a word that also has its roots in brothel. Anyway, they are bemoaning the fact that Asch is in America and has abandoned his Polish readership. This is 1909, Asch's first journey to America, which lasts for about 10 months, 1909 to 10. So there's a sort of cute interplay here between the Polish and the American literary worlds, and the two of them are saying, "Oi, wo schleppen sie unser Schulemken?" Well, where are they taking our Sholem? What are they doing with our beloved Sholem Asch? And the third one says, "Don't worry, he'll tire of America soon enough, and he'll come back to us." So it references God of Vengeance. It references the literary politics between Abe Khan of the Forwards and Zhitlovsky, and Asch's there in the middle.
David,
Yes?
may I ask a question? This is so fascinating. I am just blown away because I love the Kundis. I have a lot of illustrations from the Kundis. Did you notice in here that they're not wearing shoes and
Yes.
that their feet look almost like apes? Right?
True. That's true. So that is not, as far as I know, directly referenced in the cartoon, in the text, in the dialogue.
No, it's not in the dialogue, but
No.
boy, I mean, if I had to, if somebody asked me, who are these guys? I'd say, look, they're apes wearing human clothes and yeah,
Right.
I don't know. Anyway,
No,
the politics are fascinating.
That's a great point. And I mean, they look like they're in a chain gang, or who knows what. And you're right, actually. You look at Zhitlovsky's body on the left. Yeah, definitely portrayed with sort of hairy feet like that. You can sort of delve endlessly and sort of unpeel the layers of these cartoons, because they are so rich in different sort of meanings, and sometimes very hard to actually work out what the immediate cause of them, what was the sort of particular controversy, what was the cafe gossip that sparked an idea for a cartoon in the cartoonist's minds. It's really hard to actually do that sort of excavation, that literary history detective work. So this again sets the scene for the cartoon you're about to see, which is all about the Yiddish theater, and it's from the same period, 1909-10, when Asch is in America for the first time, and plays are a big part of his professional writing life and a big part of his income. If you can sell a play and it plays for dozens, or better still, hundreds of performances, that's a much more a much better source of income than selling stories. So some of the personalities we'll see reflected in the cartoon. Once again, Abe Khan, the editor of the New York Forwards paper, the world's biggest selling and best known Yiddish daily of all time. That's him at the bottom. Then you have Jacob Adler with this. He often liked to be photographed in this sort of classical side-on pose, like a sort of Roman emperor. And he really, he was an incredibly handsome man and had women constantly flocking around him. On his right, Kenny Liptzin, perhaps the best known dramatic actress of the golden age of the New York Yiddish theater in the 1890s and early 1900s. And a little hint of the sort of buzz outside the People's Theater in that picture in the bottom right of the screen, one of the main Yiddish theaters in New York in the 1900s. And the Thalia Theater, another big Yiddish theater on 2nd Avenue, a poster again from the early 1900s on the left. So you would see these posters on the street, out in the theater windows, of course. You can see some of them in the background on that People's Theater photograph, but also in a kosher restaurant, in shops and supporters of the theater, in photographers' studios, and so on. You would see these enormous Yiddish posters all over the Lower East Side. So these are some of the personalities that we're going to see reflected in this, again, this really glorious cartoon from 1910. And the title of the cartoon is Der Grüne Don Quixote, the Greenhorn Don Quixote, or the new, Greenhorn being a newly arrived immigrant. So Asch is actually a greenhorn in the sense that he has only been in America a few months. But despite that, here he is on his horse called Chutzpah, tilting at a windmill labeled Shund. Shund being the pejorative term for the vast swathes of popular theater, operetta, musical comedy, everything that wasn't, high art in the eyes of the critics, but everything that the public basically loved about the Yiddish theater. And there was this constant sense that the Yiddish theater was not highbrow enough, it was full of just silly song and dance routines and should have been on a much higher level. But that is not what the public wanted. So around January, February 1910, Asch campaigns for a Yiddish art theater in New York, a theater dedicated to the new repertoire that he and his associates, Peretz Hirschbein, and others are writing, and that would put aside the musical comedy and operetta and melodrama. And of course, it's a completely quixotic idea. It's never going to succeed, certainly not in the sort of economy of the Yiddish theater of that time. So he is unsuccessfully tilting at the windmills of popular theater with his sidekick, Abe Kahn, as Sancho Panza on his donkey entitled Bintel, this famous Bintel brief column in the forwards, sort of pack of letters. So Kahn's paper is the vehicle for Asch to campaign for a better Yiddish theater, and in the background are the windmills of the, I have to read them, the People's Theater, the Italia Theater, and so on. And Asch's shield has the word self-respect, Selbstanerkennung, written on it. So this is a campaign for the self-respect of Yiddish culture and the Yiddish theater, which is, as the cartoonist suggests, doomed to failure. It's glorious, beautifully expressed.
Oh, just brilliant.
Yeah, it's so inventive, so clever, so witty, so topical. All right. So moving on, again, just quickly setting the scene for what's to come. A group of writers in the middle called Die Junge, the young ones. Joseph Opatoshu on the bottom, Yud Schwartz, the poet. In the middle is David Ignatov, Moshe Leib Halperin, top right, and a couple of others. So they were this kind of upstart circle of young writers, poets for the most part, who emerge around 1907-8 in New York. They're all recent immigrants, young recent immigrants from Eastern Europe. To the left, a minor writer called Joseph Bank, and on the right, a writer called Meir Blinken, who is the great-grandfather of America's new Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, also a Yiddish writer. So with that information, here's the cartoon from around 1910-11, and it features a sort of minor fringe group of Die Junge. They weren't even the central writers, these guys standing up, having their shoes shined by the likes of Mendel and Moiches Forum, Sholem Aleichem, Yehoyash, Peretz, Sholem Asch, and so on. And the title, Unsere junge Zutzikers denken als die Alte, darfen bei sie die Stiefel putzen. Was denkt ihr? Our young sort of sweeties is very dismissive. Our young cuties think that the old ones should shine their boots. What do you think? It's pretty obvious what you think and everybody thinks. that they were not kind of, especially this group who are really not particularly well-known guys. They are not fit to displace the alter, the old guys. And that's Sholem Asch on the far right there. All right. A sort of rather sweet cartoon, a sort of lyrical cartoon, again from the Big Stick, the Große Kundus from 1915. This one drawn by Shoel Raskin, who was again, brilliantly all-round illustrator, painter, prominent cartoonist, a writer on Jewish art in the Yiddish press. And it's a monument, you know, it's Raskin's fantasy monument to the author of the Shtetl, Asch's famously lyrical novella, The Shtetl, that he wrote in 1905, that sort of bathed the world of the Shtetl in this kind of romantic, idyllic aura, in sharp contrast to what a lot of other writers were writing, which was a sort of a place of primitivism and mud and backwardness. That's not how Asch saw it, at least in that novella. And so the title is Sholem Asch, der Mann, was hat mit dem Spitz von sein Feder, with the tip of his pen, has penetrated to the very heart of the Shtetl, right? Mm. Okay. So it's a sort of different kind of cartoon, respectful, rather beautiful, and there's a Shtetl scene at the top. This, I'm just going to keep a little eye on the time. This is a sort of very, very kind of insider cartoon from 1915 that satirizes an event that Asch was supposed to turn up in New York, but actually sort of bowed out of in very flowery terms with a letter in the foreword saying, "I'm so sorry, I had to be fundraising for war victims in Toronto." And according to the Kundus, he wasn't even in Toronto, so why wasn't he at the event? Mm-hmm. In New York in 1915. So he says for the line below the cartoon, Herr Asch war bluff, verdient Stroff. So for a joke like that, you deserve this punishment. Huh. So again, you know, just a lot of comedy, a lot of satire. There's a whole series. Okay, I got this wrong. This is not the forwards. It's actually satirizing the forwards. It's again the Große Kundus, the Big Stick. They run a whole series in 1915 called 3-in-1. And the 3-in-1 trope or conceit is a mix of, on the right, what your friends think of you. So Sholem Asch's friends think he's a great artist and a great intellectual. What your enemies think of you. So in Asch's case, his enemies think he's a big mouth with big fists. And der Emes, with the truth of the thing, is in this case, the Emes is that Asch is a feinem Blatt, was deckt zu die Schande von vorwärts. Leaf hiding the shame of the forwards. So this is politics. This is about the forwards politics. Sort of increasingly, a paper that's increasingly abandoned its socialist roots. It's moving to the right on Zionism and issues like that. And they maintain respectability by hiring writers like Asch, all right? So it's cute, it's very, 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 very clever. He did have a big mouth, you know, he was a controversialist, so that's also true. Both things, I don't know that he thought of himself so much as an intellectual, but you know, who's to say? But it's a really lovely cartoon. All right, and both the previous two cartoons were by this artist Lola, so I just included as an illustration of the really many-sided talents of these people. Lola was also a prominent graphic artist in the Jewish world. This is a commercial ketubah design on the one side that he creates for and then much later, towards the end of his life in the 1950s, this large folio album of his East Side drawings, the Amulika East Side in Bilder, the side of yesteryear in pictures, comes out in Yiddish and English, and you can see his full name, Leon Israel, but better known, and therefore in brackets, Lola, his cartoon name, his pen name. Another very, very funny cartoon, I don't know the date of this one. It's probably early again, and it's certainly from the Große Kundis, and it references a controversy from Poland from 1907, where Asch weighed in, criticizing the decision of the rabbinate in I think it was Warsaw, certainly in Poland. Anyway, the story was that a small boy had died before being circumcised, and the religious authorities refused to let him be buried in a Jewish cemetery without being posthumously circumcised. And that Asch saw as a grotesque thing, and he wrote a sort of thundering article about how barbaric this would be. And so he was known as somebody who was not opposed to circumcision per se, but who had, weighed in on this particular controversy. And here he is holding back a moil, the circumciser, with his knife in hand, who's saying, "Oi, oi, oi, los mich, leave me alone to Yiddischen dem Eck." Now, Eck in Yiddish is a tip, a point, an extremity, and here, obviously, to sort of Jewify the penis, basically, to make Jewish the tip, to Yiddischen dem Eck. It's just a sort of crazy phrase in Yiddish. And Asch's words are rendered in thick Warsaw dialect, his own slang, really, the dialect he spoke. So instead of ich, it's yach for ich, which is exactly how he spoke. So he's saying, no, not on my watch, basically. All right. This is just a rather lovely drawing, a sort of wonderful drawing of New York Yiddish writers in a kibbutz, a cafe, with some identifiable faces like Opatoshu. Asch is at the back, side on, standing up. And then some I can identify, some not, but there are a bunch of prominent writers portrayed. So then we get into the 20s, and the cartoon from the Hind, the great speculation frenzy. Asch is being tugged in all different directions by rival newspaper editors and by an identifiable figure on the left called Arnold Schiffman, who was Jewish, a very sort of assimilated Polish-Jewish theater manager and director, who's trying to pull him away from the sort of grasping yellow press editors who are on the right of the picture. Okay, I'm going to race through these. This is mid-20s, the Asch bomb blowing up der Jiddische Gas, the sort of Jewish street. It's just full of kind of commotion and controversy about Asch's plays. A lot of amateur companies were putting on Motka Ganef, the God of Vengeance, and it was often hugely controversial in the shtetl because, men and women were acting together. They were having to play lesbians in the case of God of Vengeance, and there would be tremendous arguments between parents and children, between communal authorities who didn't want them to maybe use a barn or a fire station or something for a play. So, there may be some of that going on here. This is a very, very cute cartoon again that references the Nobel Peace Prize from 1926 that went to a German diplomat who had supposedly created peace, which was, even at that time, people could see was sort of unraveling in Europe. And Asch is basically shown as complaining that I am Sholem, peace. I am the man of peace. Why haven't I been given the Peace Prize? Very, very witty cartoon. This one from another Polish satirical paper satirizes his attempt to sort of play both sides in terms of Polish politics. So a lover in love on two fronts. He's presenting bouquets to the Hind newspaper and also the Volkszeitung, so the Zionists and the Bundists. And really shown, trying to sort of please everybody in terms of not wanting to come down firmly on the side of either the Bund or the Zionist parties in Poland, which is true. He had a lot of sympathy for both groups. friends among both groups and never wholeheartedly identified with either one. This is, Ash the Strongman by the wonderful Yitzhak Broiner, an artist from Lodz, Yiddish group in Lodz in the 20s. And this is a Yiddish theater, satirical cartoon again from Poland with again about the Shund, the popular theater. That's the Shund tree tethering the woman representing Yiddish theater, who Asch wearing a magnet entitled Business and Pjessen Plays is trying to pull this popular theater, over to his side, away from the side of Shund, and it's very, very cutely written. She is shown saying, "Oi, Sholem Asch, für euch bin ich bereit zu gehen auf Kiddush Hashem. For you, I'll commit martyrdom in the holy name." But Kiddush Hashem is also one of Asch's most, at that point, very, very popular plays that runs for hundreds of performances in a Yiddish theater. So again, it's a play on words. It's an insider sort of Yiddish theater cartoon. It's very, very funny. Also by Lola.
Right.
This is the Polish strongman Pilsudski, Marshal Pilsudski, being greeted by Jews in Poland. And that's by way of background for this cartoon from the Soviet Yiddish paper, Der MS, Truth, that shows Asch, that you can see the front page, and then I picked out the detail. And Asch is shown as coming down from Mount Sinai being Pilsudski's boot. And so he's sort of worshipping at the shrine of Pilsudski, trying to appease the powers in Poland. And of course, Pilsudski, in terms of the Soviet communist politics, was a kind of fascist and a far right figure who they loathed. So that's that. These are a group of Bundists throwing out the Sholem Asch pen and saying, "Out with Sholem Asch, no more Sholem Asch." Again, referencing Polish politics of the interwar years, which was very, very, especially between Bundists and Zionists, about the Jewish future in Poland. And this is a scene from a wonderful recent production by the Camry Theatre in Tel Aviv, adapted version of Asch's God of Vengeance. By way of introduction to the final cartoon here, which is 1930, which is Asch's 50th year. It's also his 30th Jubilee year as a writer. And here, the critic, a bowing figure on the left, titled The Critic, is ushering in Sholem Asch, accompanied by a woman who is labeled Yiddish Literatur, Yiddish literature, entering the Weltliche Literaturpalaz, the palace of secular or world literature, having come down this winding path from the Heiske, the Heisel, which is a little hut, a cottage, but also a brothel. So it cutely references God of Vengeance, and it's a cartoon in honor of his 50th birthday. So there, I think we'll end, and these are just some of the people who helped me gather these cartoons together in the course of their own research, really. And there are no doubt dozens more to be found in the future. But just a hint there of Asch's celebrity as reflected through the popular press. And there we go. So Avi.
Wow.
I'll stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Wow. First of all, I am so blown away by all this, because I'm not certainly a maven or an expert in any of this, but
no.
Over the years, I've certainly been exposed to so many elements of what you've talked about. The kundis is actually very important in the work my mother has done for the past 25 years. And in her book, The Key to Yiddish, her textbook, there are dozens and dozens of magnificent, actually, I'm going to share my screen for a second, because, there are some amazing, and I find them so relevant today.
Yes.
This is Raskin, a folk von Schleppel. And you have the Jewish people in the wagon, the Yiddish folk, and the Radikalen, the radicals to the right, the Orthodoxen, schlepping to the left, a folk von Schlepper. And the wagon stays in the same place. The Americans giving money to what was then the settlements in Israel. The wars, the Moses, the Geschmacke Ma'acholim. I mean, this is stunning. So, I've been doing a lot of research into the Kundis.
Right.
And so I am fascinated. That was one of my favorites. Moses, who gave the 2 tablets. And the Jew says, look at this mass that I have to carry of Jewish literature. It's all your fault. And Moses says, was bin ich schuldig? It's not my fault. I just gave you 2 tablets. Look what you did. And so obviously there's an enormous amount. Here's Lola again from the Kundis.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
this is absolutely. And your mother Miriam's book, was at least one of the cartoons I showed is in that book.
Yes.
I think maybe the shtetl, the tip of the pen penetrating the heart of the shtetl cartoon, if I remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Now,
these are just, such a sort of unexplored, unappreciated vein of modern Jewish culture, these cartoons.
I'm also incredibly fascinated by the politics, because, Abe Kahan is someone that I have done an enormous amount of research on because of the rise of David Levinsky. And he, of course, was such an important figure in Yiddish literature and the Yiddish cultural world and the Yiddish political world of that early time. And so I am fascinated by the allies and the enemies and the politics of that time. So, yeah, quite amazing. I took a couple of notes. The kibitzer, you mentioned the kibitzer was actually the first name for the Kundis.
Right. Briefly, for
the first year in 1907 or 9, the Kundis was actually called the Kibitzer, and then it became the Kundis. You mentioned the tzutziks that were shining the shoes. Well, tzutzik is also a tzotzke, is to suck, the sucklings.
Ah,
so
nice.
Tzutzikis were also those who were still sucking at the breast of the great Yiddish writers that came before him.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that Lola wrote a book, The Amoleke East Side, right? The Once Upon a Time East Side. But he wrote it in 1915. So, in 1915, they were already talking, about the history, the Once Upon a Time, the nostalgic East Side of the late 1880s.
Yes, people are beginning to really work seriously on the cartoons. Eddie Portnoy at Evo, notably did a recent exhibit, which is online on the Evo website, about their political cartoons, about the anti-alien movement in the 20s in America, the early and mid 20s through to the door sort of slamming shut. And it is fascinating, as you look at the Kundis especially, to see the mix of sort of Jewish and world politics and Americans, a lot of American politics reflected for the Yiddish-speaking Jewish reader, but a huge amount about world events, the League of Nations, the rise of fascism, all of that.
And they also talked a lot about the immigrant. It's amazing to me. There are beautiful illustrations in the Kundis about how the new Americans of that time, when your great-grandfather came to America, became an American, they no longer, not your great-grandfather, but many of the new immigrants didn't want the new immigrants to come. They were pushing against the immigration of those who came after them. And again, I find that so relevant to today.
Yeah.
Because, today we're living in a world, of course, of anti-immigrant, America first, but they were dealing with the same issues at the turn of the century.
Yeah, so there's maybe no single figure who appears more in the pages of the Kundis than Uncle Sam.
Right.
Uncle Sam and the Statue of Liberty.
That's right. That's
You know,
absolutely right.
huge
So
sort of
many.
variations on those two figures
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the stories of the day.
Yeah. And the commentary on war and peace and the Jews who were dying for all the other countries, but had no home of their own, obviously pre, 1948 in the state of Israel.
Yes.
So fascinating, and so fascinating to hear about Sholem Asch, who again, I am so amazed by as such a great literary figure in the history of Yiddish literature and being rediscovered today, which is wonderful, you know.
Mm, mm.
And so much of the Yiddish literary world is being rediscovered today by so many people like yourself and Shane Baker and so many around the world, academicians, performers, singers. I love that Yiddish is having such a great renaissance thanks to people like you. So
Well,
thank you, David.
and of course you and you know we're all sort of discovering. I mean, I honestly I feel the more I find out, the less I know, because you've just become aware of how we've just begun to scrape the surface of this culture and the literature, and how much more there is to discover. And it's certainly in terms of cartoons of Ash and others, a huge amount to be unearthed from the pages of the Yiddish press.
Right. Well, thank you, David, for this wonderful, wonderful lecture. So interesting, so insightful. I want to remind all of you who are still watching, please go look up Ash Wednesday on YouTube, Ash Wednesday 2021. It's an amazing program, and I'm very honored to have been a part of it. David, you want to tell us what's up next for you and the Yiddish Book Center?
A lot of public programs. I guess thinking about when the center might reopen to the public, which will be a wonderful moment. Hopefully at some point this year. A lot of different courses for translators, for students, all the programs that are online at the moment. We're adding new books to the digital library all the time. We just added all of Chaim Grada's, or the majority of Chaim Grada's novels and stories to the free
Great.
to view, download digital library. So tremendous amount of activity here.
Just wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know the Yiddish Book Center, then it's a crime against the Jewish humanity. Go to the Yiddish Book Center, see what they're doing, see all their offerings, take their classes, read the books, support their work, because it's so important. One of the greatest Jewish organizations in the world today. Thank you, David. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Avi. I'll say goodbye.
All right. And I will see you soon. Hopefully, Itzik Munger, May 30th.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
That'll be fun.
We'll talk.
Take care.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining this, what I think is a fascinating, unbelievably fascinating program. Don't forget, tonight at 8 o'clock, Aaron Kula, Klezmer Company Jazz Orchestra, from Borscht to Broadway, the legacy of 2nd Avenue, 10 musicians, 4 performers, just Lindsay Corey, not Forgy, that was her maiden name, Lindsay Corey and Oscar Cheda, Laura Turnbull, who happens to be Mrs. Avi Hoffman, and myself, doing a great program that I know you'll enjoy. Tomorrow, 12 noon, Chap Lap, for children of all ages. Bring your grandkids, bring your children, bring yourself, bring your parents, and bring your grandparents. But it's really Dr. Seuss in Yiddish, Rudyard Kipling in Yiddish, and Shikha Dries, one of the great Yiddish writers who wrote a beautiful children's story, Die Wollene Jiden, in English, translated by my mother, with great illustrations by them and the great Tzip Valetsky. My mother's friend Cyril Valetsky will be showing many of the illustrations she did with my mother. And then at 2 o'clock, we close tomorrow with the Megillah cycle by the great Congress for Jewish Culture, the beautiful Megillah leader of Itzik Munger, produced by Shane Baker and the wonderful Congress for Jewish Culture, directed, narrated, starring the unbelievable, my idol, Mike Burstyn, and some of the greatest talents from around the world performing. Leah Koenig in Israel, who was in Shtisel. For those of you who are Shtisel lovers, she was the mother of Sholem Shtisel. Daniel Kahn from Germany, Aaron Rickman and Yelena Schmulson, Eleanor Risa, Suzanne Torin, the Yid Life Crisis Boys, Ellie Battalion and Jamie Ellman from Montreal, myself as Homin Arushe, Latik, and several others whose names I don't remember at the moment. Hopefully you will join us at 2 p.m. for the closing of our Purim Fest. Monday, we pick up with our Why I Love Jewish, new Jewish play reading series. And so join us at 7 o'clock on Monday. Tuesday, Schmoozing with Avi at 7 o'clock. All of these wonderful programs are brought to you by Why I Love Jewish and our sponsors, the great Betsy Hotel live here at South Beach. I love this wonderful hotel. The University of Miami. Restream is one of our great sponsors, brings it to you on all of our platforms. The Chenstochova Society and Relief Agency, and all of our new and wonderful sponsors, the Mark A. Levin Philanthropic Fund, the John and Amy Israel Pregelman, and our newest sponsor, Dr. Bruce and Leslie Zaffron. We are so grateful to all of them. And I would like to just leave you with, the idea that we need your help too. Without your help, we can't bring you any of these things. Our sponsors are not enough because we need your help as well. And so please go to our website and support us in any way you can, because all of our programs are free to the public. Our Yiddish courses are not. They're very inexpensive, $60 for a 6-week, 1 hour a week course called Yiddish Fun 01, Fun 02, and Fun 03. You can find it on our website. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Hopefully you'll join us at 8 p.m. Ashenim Dank. Seid gesund und stark.